Welcome back.
You know what I want to talk about today? I want to talk about part-time CPOs and CTOs.
Part-time. Okay, we don't say that anymore,
No,
right?
we don't say that. Okay, well, I want to talk about temp CTOs and CPOs.
Temp. Oh, my God. That harkens back to the 80s.
Oh,
temp agencies, temp people.
Okay, I want to talk about consultant CPOs and CTOs.
Oh, right. That's still so yesteryear. We want to talk about fractional people. That is here and today. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Fractional CXOs is fractional any role, really. But we'll talk about the senior roles because they are more challenging as not full-time.
So why we're talking about this today is I listened to an HBR podcast about this topic not too long ago. A couple articles came to our attention that we saw about it, and a couple of posts on various social media, some of which might have been good. I won't say the names of them. And we've just been noticing the uptick in people with this job title. In fact, one of the podcasts I listened to on this had the claim in it that pre-pandemic, I don't think the article is exactly correct. Pre-pandemic, there were 2,000-ish people with fractional, whatever the title was, in their bio on LinkedIn, and then post-pandemic there were 110,000. So like a major explosion over a 2-year period, and that's the trend that we're kind of pointing out in this podcast. That kind of got our attention of like, oh, is this really a trend? Why is this not called part-time? Or that's my first question. You can already tell what side of this discussion I'm on. So there's been an excellent rebranding of part-time into, we're fractional now. Fractional.
I think it's just one of those things that happens over time is you do get the evolution of terms and terminology, right? So now in modern day parlance, what used to be part-time is now known as fractional. The other thing is that part-time has somewhat of in my mind, a slightly negative connotation.
Oh, I thought you were going to say classist because
there's that too.
I thought it's too early for surprise. It's Taylorism on the podcast, but listen, Taylor was a part-time employee. He was a consultant,
right?
But that's a term made up for just being part-time. He was a hired gun who didn't work a full-time job. So, but that doesn't sound as good as he was a management consultant.
He was a management consultant, self-titled. A lot of fractional people are also, I find, self-titled. I'm sure we're going to get some lashings for that, but that's okay. Lashings are welcome.
Maybe.
Tis the season, so please let us know.
Let's listen. Everybody already feels where Brian is at. Where Brian's not going to be cynical on this podcast. Brian's going to be positive. I want to start off with all of the strong points for fractional role that either is in the CTO role or CPO role or even product management, right? So someone in those, like one of those strategic direction roles that may not be a core key founder role in an organization. I want to start with the strong supporting claims on the podcast, and I want to walk through those to give ourselves a nice, fair, level shot
before
I maraud into this room and start putting my feet up on the couch.
That's the side of the Arguing Agile that I'm going to take, probably. It sounds like on the other side of the fence, but that's good.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe we both can explore both. So,
all right, we can do that.
The first point that we want to talk about is, listen, Brian, I know, like, part-time consultant, whatever, man, get over it. It helps small companies and maybe medium-ish companies. That's what SMB. That's what the M in SMB means. Medium-ish.
Medium-ish. Small,
yes.
medium-ish.
Yes, medium-ish. Yes. Sean Connery is on the podcast today. Yes, medium-ish. I'm Egyptian, you peacock. It enables small the fractional aspect of it, the part-time aspect of it. That's right. I said part-time. It enables small companies to access high-level strategic expert, like the C-level expertise, people with previous C-level experience that otherwise, because they're a small company, maybe the founders, maybe this is their first company, maybe they're like the Brian Chesky founders are like 23 or whatever. They get someone in there who has experience with the stress and the pressure and trying big swings and stuff like that. That'd be the big advantage. And specifically in the product realm, the big advantage here is they get someone who knows how to try out and test and feel out product strategies without actually hiring somebody and giving them 40% of the company or 30% of the company or whatever.
If you're a small company, just launch it. You're maybe just an entrepreneurial organization, right? You haven't got those rounds of funding yet.
Right.
In that scenario, absolutely. It's a great way to tap into the talent you really need. But what I found is that a lot of companies don't rise above that. Like, so many companies just falter and die. But other companies then attract seed corn funding, etc., VC rounds. They quickly go away from fractional roles, and they have, especially with this level of seniority in the company, they will have people that bring in with brand recognition, with names. So then in that case, they typically are not CXOs that are fractional. But there's that period when you launch the company and you're trying to get it off the ground, reach escape velocity, perfect to get fractional people in because you can afford them. You can't afford to bring somebody in with a mega salary like a real CPO, CXO would command, right?
Yeah.
So that does make sense to me.
Yeah. Aside from the idea of like, if you get even if you don't get let's say you're a fractional just product manager or head of product or whatever. You don't even have the chief title or the equity or whatever.
CPO,
yeah, you're just a hired gun, part-time, working on contract product manager, right? Even you come in with experience over and above the company founders or whatever. They find you as a product manager who has experience. I think of like real niche. Is it niche or niche? Real niche experience. That's right.
Thanks to the French.
Real niche experience in industries. So like, I want to break into. I'm going to go hire somebody like Stormy, for example, who's been on previous. Like, she has technology experience, she has product experience, and she used to be a registered nurse. Or I don't know, is still a registered nurse. But like, I want to hire somebody like that because none of the founders of the company have that experience. So we're going to hire somebody to help us figure out our strategies. We have this technology or this product or whatever that seems to fit in this market, or we're trying to explore this market or break into this market. We need to go hire. I used to be at a logistics firm, and what they would do is they would hire an executive from a trucking company that was very large that they wanted to sell the products to. And they would hire that executive and put him on staff as like the chief. Well, actually, it would be a VP role. They would never hire executives like this, but they would be like, you're the VP of strategic something or other, VP of strategic initiatives, or VP of, actually, they did do this at the C-level, the chief revenue officer. They did this one time. But really all it is like, you were the chief, or you were a very high up executive in Brian and Ohm's trucking company. Right. So we're hiring you. Congratulations, Ohm. You were one of the founders of Brian Ohm's trucking company, and now Brian's Solus tech company is now hiring you because maybe we can sell Brian Ohm's trucking company our widget solution for widgets or whatever. So we'll hire you and we'll keep you on staff for like 12, 18 months. And if the sale goes through, then whatever. I mean, we paid you $150,000, $175,000, hold you on the payroll for a year. And if that money goes away, whatever. It was a good bet.
Yeah, essentially you're buying the depth of domain knowledge here, right? That's what you're doing.
Maybe
here.
your foot in a market.
Yeah, and that's a very good strategy because guess what? People that are founding the company don't have that. So you're going in with your eyes closed as opposed to bringing somebody in who can hold your hand through these choppy waters. So I think that's a very legit use case of why you want somebody like that at that phase of your company transformation.
I think you're right. And like we could go, we talked about trucking, we talked about logistics, talk about healthcare. What we didn't talk about is government, because if you're working on like secured systems or whatever and you don't have any experience in that, how are you going to break into that? You need to go get somebody who's been through that process before with a technology company implementing and selling to the government and making systems secured. Because if you don't have somebody from inside that ecosystem, I mean, I don't know how you would ever break into it.
You don't have to, as long as you're friends with the person who's nominating you. No, we're not going there. We're not going there. So
those people are more expensive, I would think.
They are, for sure. Yeah. So one of the things I want to say here is this, right? So the people that you're bringing in that have the domain experience, they already have to be successful in their own right, for you to tap them. Mm-hmm. If they're successful, they are taking the bet as well, right? They see something, they like it. Yeah. Why would they otherwise come on to your organization, not in a full-time capacity even, right? They're hedging their bet perhaps because they're not sure, but they have that domain, they have the depth. So you're bringing them in. The other thing it does is for your potential customers, these might be your first customers, right? It lends credibility that so-and-so has joined. Fred Flintstone is joining our board, right?
Right.
Makes a difference
Right.
because, he's got the car that he steps in and runs with. At least he knows about it.
Yeah.
His wheels are round and we don't know what shape it should be. It makes sense, right? So from that perspective, in those kinds of organizations, it's perfectly logical, right? It's for having these fractional roles.
I mean, it makes so like this is probably honestly, it's like a one line thing, a note that we wrote down, but honestly, it's ending up making the most sense out of everything we talked about. Other than like, if you're hiring someone and they're going to do product work, they probably need some experience about like creating and rolling out strategy. Honestly, like this might be the most important thing is cross-industry experience. I was at a company one time that 2 out of the 3 of the founders of the company were experts in the hospitality industry, restaurants specifically, restaurants. And then the other founder was an expert in service tech, like people that would come into restaurants and fix things, like fix your refrigerator, fix your ovens, So one side of the company was service for restaurants. The other side was restaurant management, actually running a profitable restaurant. And that company always wanted to expand into hotels. Because if you think about a hotel, most hotels have some sort of restaurant inside the hotel. And if they don't have a restaurant, they have like a Starbucks, or they have a cafe, or they put out breakfast
in there.
They have something. Yeah, they have those assets. It might be on a lower scale than a restaurant, but they have those assets. So the company always had in the back of their mind this strategic bet. If we can just get the right person that understands the hotel industry, all of our stuff would be applicable. And they never quite made that jump because they never found the right person who both understood them and their capabilities and understood the other domain. So I'm looking at this one and I'm like, this like note that we just made to ourselves.
Yeah, just a couple of words. Yeah,
extremely valuable. It could. I've come completely around. It could be extremely valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I certainly agree with that. I think we should have probably even come up with examples like that people can relate to. But everybody who's thinking about this can probably come up with their own examples.
Well, right? I just gave you 2, so those are real life.
I mean, maybe in this case you're a small hospitality company who really doesn't have heavy presence in terms of F&B, but you want to break into that because that's additional revenue streams. But yeah, so it just depends on your growth strategy. The shoe fits. I mean,
it also assumes you have a strategy.
So you can bring people in for that too, I guess. You mentioned a role or a title earlier, Chief Revenue Officer.
Sure, yeah.
So there are others that I've seen, like today, Chief Experience Officer. And in the HR world, Chief People Officer.
Yep.
These aren't just HR people that are doing your payroll. In fact, those functions could be outsourced. But these are people that are growing your talent in-house and so forth. So yeah, there's a bunch of those newer roles.
And they have slightly different missions. The L&D and stuff might fall under a people person, whereas like HR doesn't care about L&D. I mean, like they totally care. Yeah, I feel I'm getting sassier by the minute. All right, let's move on. So specifically for like the CTO, if you don't have a technical founder, especially, like, I mean, first of all, what are you doing with your life? But you're getting somebody in who understands technical leadership. Like the technical day-to-day and technical leadership are 2 different things.
Absolutely.
That's a whole different podcast. I don't know. But also like process transformation, and also our previous podcast on the product lifecycle. It is called Arguing Agile 193.
Ooh, I was
Product
close.
Lifecycle Phases from MVP to Sunset, a guide for product managers. It's very wordy.
But it's worth every word.
It's good though. I mean, like, look at the description. The description is like pretty bare bones. So we had a podcast, Arguing Agile 193, Product Lifecycle Phases. That was the where we talked about the different phases that your products are in, and then the transitions when you move from like growth phase to maturity and et cetera, MVP to growth phase. Having leadership, fractional or otherwise, part-time or otherwise, I'm not letting it go this whole podcast. Super critical that they understand that, like, we're in MVP phase right now. Listen, we don't need a bunch of API and front-end automated testing that fires with every release. And I don't need that. Like, I'm in MVP phase. Not everything needs a test in MVP phase. And people will look at me and be like, Brian, like, have you been drinking? Like, get out of my office. And I'll be like, no, I haven't. Like, we're in MVP phase.
Right.
I will throw away everything that we're doing if the customers don't use it when we introduce it to the market.
I mean, the most critical thing you want is feedback early, right?
Yes, I'm doing all this for feedback. Yeah. I'm doing all this in the hopes that you will know when we have implemented a feature that people really need. And because it will be night and day from like the normal like every day tick up one little thing at a time over time.
Boom.
Yeah. It'll just be a very vertical climb in usage and stuff like that. And I need a leader that understands that and is like, look, 90% of the features we roll out, they're going to miss the target. And that's okay because we're pre-market fit.
Right.
I can't have a leader that does not understand these phases and then does not have self-awareness for the organization to say, we are in the growth phase. Like growth and bringing new business in is the most important thing. And I don't care about anything else. I've got the teams. They're up at all hours of the night watching logs, my product managers are working 50, 60 hours, like getting email on their phone as soon as something comes in. Like everyone's super stressed. We're in the growth phase and gearing everything towards understanding we're in the growth phase with the idea that we're not going to be here forever. So like they're getting things ready for the future. That there's a difference between that and just grinding your people all day long in this. What I just described could be a culture where you're just grinding people down to the nubs. The leader that understands we're in a phase right now, it's not going to last forever, and then optimizes for that phase.
So having a fundamental knowledge of the product lifecycle is a must of where you are. And you may not have that within your company. And looking at the bigger picture, which is perfect then for getting somebody in who does have that.
Right.
Even if you say, okay, they're not here full time, they're here as advisors. There's a lot of ground here. They could be just simply consulting for a fee, or they could have a stake in the company. It doesn't matter how they're compensated. But fractional role is important here because you can't afford the whole rather than the fractional. You can't afford to get someone full time who's done this.
So I'm going to ask the first question. I don't want to challenge right now because the challenge will be later in the podcast. Is it possible to get somebody? Is it the median person? Like not like I know that there are very experienced people with very good skill at this, that they act as a calming influence, a guy like they're from the passenger seat, they're just gonna reach over occasionally, like they're in the passenger seat listening to their music and chilling out on the car ride, and occasionally they're just gonna reach over and grab the wheel of the car and kind of guide it back where it should be and keep us all from crashing. Just like everyone in the car's freaking out that we're drifting lanes, but this person just like is very calm, and doing it fractionally. Is that possible?
Absolutely.
Right.
No, absolutely possible because, well, first of all, look at the alternative. If it weren't possible, how do you find somebody like that? Do you just let everybody in your car panic and the driver frantically go back and forth?
Yes.
Or do you say, that's a quick way down.
Yes, that's what most people do,
I then stop for just a second for me to get off this car. Look, it is possible. It is possible. Again, we should have probably, in hindsight, got some examples like this. Maybe we'll follow up later on with a second podcast with example. We'll see how we feel. So if you're listening to this, you probably could come up with your own examples like that. Where let us know, of course. That we'd be sharing with everybody else too.
Yes.
So it is possible, first of all. If it weren't possible, you wouldn't have so many companies that start bare bones with a few people that have deep knowledge of certain aspects of the domain or the business or technology, still be successful, quote unquote, market-wise, right? Bring somebody in part-time, I'll say that, or fractional, for the right amount of time for them to guide you through all this. And then maybe what will happen is they'll either be gone or they'll stay and they'll become your chief X officer that will continue to steer the ship, right?
Yeah.
When I was in the publishing domain, we were creating software for advertising for print publications, so newspapers, magazines, and so forth. And pretty much everybody in the company was technical, including the founders, but they didn't have none of them had ever worked in publishing before.
Sure. Yeah.
We had some early customers where some people naturally gravitate toward technology. I actually hired on a fractional basis somebody who sat in the call center taking ads for newspapers back in the day. And that's because, well, they were actually client-facing, so they knew the pain points of what needs to happen and what they were going through. And we learned a whole bunch. Like one of the things that I distinctly will never forget is how you have your prompts. They have prompts that they can read out to the customers. Yeah. How those prompts need to be tailored for sensitivity. It's a no-brainer when you think about it, but nobody did at the time. Right. And the prompts were the same. They were gained towards increasing the content and increasing the duration or frequency of your ad. Yeah. But that doesn't fit everywhere. For example, if you're selling a car, I'm going to ask you all that. Likewise with anything that you're selling, but what if you're advertising a death or funeral, right? that's not right for me to ask you questions, right? To increase the content or even the frequency. That makes no sense. So we learned a lot from somebody who had the domain knowledge, who said, wait, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just a little anecdote about how it can help you stay between the guardrails or even define the guardrails to begin with.
All right. We have one or two more things on this list. So the more on the technical side of it, it helps a startup establish robust technical architecture and development processes. We talked about that in terms of some architectural practice, like getting your stuff future-proofed, right? But also like development practices, meaning like getting your deliveries, making sure that small releases frequently, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You also could talk about how your technical teams are kind of formed and reformed and split and that kind of stuff. Like strong technical leadership should be aware of this kind of stuff and should be pushing you to this kind of stuff, and also keeping you on top of any trends in technology. For example, I'm not saying AI is hype and a trend, but what are we doing with AI?
Right.
Because if we don't jump ahead of it, our investors or the market or our competitors are probably going to jump ahead of us. Any technological trends that could impact, making sure that we're at least parallel or have a plan or ahead of. It'd be better to be ahead of them. But these are the main people whose responsibility is, whose accountability, right, to the leadership in the organization, this is their accountability.
Exactly. Charting the path forward. I mean, for example, things like, let's adopt a microservices architecture because, right, those kinds of things before AI came into the picture.
Well, everything's AI now. So the other main one is they should be accelerating. Well, they should be accelerating or really creating, if you haven't created this culture yet, your product innovation. So they should be pushing the teams to learn that innovation. They really should be trying to strengthen that muscle across all your teams. So like innovation shouldn't be a thing that's like done at the top and then pushed down over. Like sales figures out what the next big thing is and pushes it down to your team, or vice versa. It shouldn't be all grassroots. Like it should be the entire organization should somehow get involved in product innovation, and then the best ideas should end up in your products, validated by customers, end up in your pushed forward by your strategy.
Yeah,
there's a certain expertise to do that organizationally, and oh boy, like even like I'm already talking about like fractional people doing it part-time. It's hard enough to do full-time.
It is. So this is where we talk about things like product discovery, right? Yeah, it is. It's very hard to do this full-time. Those of you doing it know this. So part-time, these people are maestros. I mean, they've done this for years.
Right.
They come in and when we say fractional, it doesn't mean 5-10 hours a week necessarily. Maybe in some cases it does.
Yeah.
In most cases, it's probably most of the week. Yeah. Instead of 40, they could be working 30 hours. That's still fractional, right? So don't get, misled by the term part-time or fractional. These people are still pretty well invested in what they're doing. It's just that this is not the only thing they're working on, possibly.
I skipped over a lot of that well, what if this person is divided between other organizations? I left the low-hanging fruit off the podcast.
Sure.
Like, if they're working, how many teams can they work across? I mean, I guess we'll get into that here in a second of the low-hanging fruit. They're not great arguing points, but they're things that would be asked, Like the thing here is you've got somebody experienced who knows about your Marty Kagan for, ILIT categories, the technical feasibility, desirability, usability, business viability. They are tracking them across your strategies and your products. They're making sure the teams are knocking them down, or maybe they're knocking them. I don't know. I don't think that you could dedicate enough time to knock them down yourself. I think you kind of have to delegate that and then make sure the teams are broadcasting that. And like at a certain level, you don't have enough time to really do it. You can delegate it, hope it gets done, and then skim across top to be like, I don't see it being done this week. Try harder next week. So we'll get into that in a second. Yeah. This is the crest of the podcast. We're about halfway through where we start cresting to go into the why this might not work section of the podcast. But those are like the accelerating product innovation with real strategic guidance because you've done it before. That's a huge skill.
Yeah.
That's other than like breaking into other industries, that is the main talent that you're bringing here as a part-timer. Fractional.
No, that's absolutely correct. Because you have credibility in the person that's coming in. They've done it. And they can do it for you, right? That's why you're bringing them in. So makes sense to me.
Well, thanks for sticking around for the positives of this podcast. I feel we've dedicated more than enough time. And now I present to you the counterpoint. So the counterpoint comes in a several-part diatribe. I guess I'm monologuing. I haven't done this in a while. I haven't monologued in a while. If you're coming in and you're a part-timer, the organizational level experience of, like, forget tribal knowledge. Remember when we used to say tribal knowledge back in the day?
Yeah.
Okay, meaning like, oh, that file is here and it's out on the network. Go figure out where it is. And the write-up of that customer is somewhere floating around in the ether. Like that kind of stuff, like tracking stuff down. I guess when you're brought in as an executive level, you have some sort of gravitas to be like, no, you go find it for me. Some of that doesn't hold up when you're in a small company. So you will be fighting against the deep organizational engagement that you would have normally if you were a full-time employee. And in addition to that, when you're on multiple teams, there's this cognitive load of overhead, of context switching when you're on multiple teams. Okay, so when you're part of the leadership team, every C-level executive is a member of the leadership team first, the C-suite first. And so they have a horizontal C-suite and they have a vertical, their team. And their team is just one silo and all the rest of the silos in the organization. So you're already on two teams trying to make sense of what you're supposed to be doing. Yep. And potentially you might be working with two companies as a part-time chief product officer at the same time. You potentially are on 4 teams. First of all, out of the gate, you're failing.
4 teams in 2 different orgs is a huge challenge, right? Because that's what we're talking about. If you're, right, maybe. So if you're on 4 teams, if you're fractional, you're at least on 2 orgs, maybe more, but 2. If you're on 2 orgs, on 2 teams, that's still a challenge, right? If you're on more than 1 team, let's say on org A, you're on 2 teams, org B, you're on 1 team, that's 3 teams, but in different orgs. Come on.
I mean, you might say, oh, it's not that bad because like the C-level team, the founder team is only 3 people. So like, okay, like it's 3 people. We talk in the morning, 20, 30 minutes every morning. We just get together before like 7:30 in the morning. I was once at a company where I was their first product manager. Yep. And I would call the CEO first thing in the morning at 6:30 a.m. his time. Yep. And I'd have a quick 20, 30 minute stand up. Usually it was like 10 minutes. Sometimes it went on as long as 20, 25 minutes. Just these are the strategies we're employing in today. These are the things that we're going to try. These are the customers we're going to talk to. Quick sync, you know what I mean? Because they didn't know product. That's before any other employees got into the office because we realized we're part of this other team, which is the executives. The executives need to sync before any normal employees. But like, I don't know if that's a great story. Because basically what I'm repping now is if you go read Inspired and Marty King says, I don't know any successful product managers that work less than 60 hours, that is propagating that, you know what I mean? That I don't know if that's great.
It's not great. So you're really talking about being a fractional person working 60 hours? At least 40.
You're fractional.
Fraction.
You're working 40 hours at that company and 40 hours at the other company.
How does that work?
Fractional.
Exactly. How does that work, right? If you're on 2 different orgs, though, you have to have your head around product cycles in 2 different orgs, potentially 2 different industries. I don't know how it's humanly possible to do that in spending a few hours a week on each.
I completely get it if you're willing to say, like, hey, when I'm working with your company, I will clear the plate. No more, you know what I mean? No other clients. Right. When I work with you, I'm solo with you. I've got no cognitive load. I'm dedicated to you, your customers, your problems, your teams. That makes total sense. And I will tell you, that is the only model that makes total sense to me.
That model is where I've seen CFOs or CFOs, directors, finance, whatever use, right? Because they work with one company at a time during the month. So while they're working with that company, they're working only with that company. Yeah. And then they switch over to another company.
When you are the product manager, the CTO, you are the accountable person for technology. Oh, we're not doing anything AI related. They need to come to the CTO and be like, why are we not doing anything AI related? That's the single point. You're not going to individual product managers or individual development teams. You need to go to the CTO as the head of like the future of technology, the person with their finger on the pulse of future technology to say, why are we not engaging in any AI strategies at all?
It's a strategic decision that they're making, right?
It is.
So they have to defend that.
Yeah, I understand. This is probably my weakest point that I'm going to push today, which is because you're a part-timer, you cannot fully be accountable for every customer, every technology, every discussion, decision, because there is just not enough time in the day for a full-time product manager to explore all the options. And then you're going to cut that in half, potentially. I don't know what it might be 10%, whatever.
Yep.
You might be just being an advisor role. Sure. The weak parts of what I'm saying was you might say you as the C might not be accountable because you're just in an advisor role, and I'm going to hold the individual product managers accountable. So like you're accountable through their accountability falling through. So, I mean,
yeah, it's a tricky space. I mean, look, who's accountable, on a commercial airline, right? If you have a part-time captain, they're not always flying the plane.
Right.
They're accountable for that flight, right? So the pilots themselves that are actually, they have hands-on time, these are the people that are responsible. That responsibility is delegated to them. Mm-hmm. But if you have the captain who is part-time, what happens during the time when they're not there? You still have to have that same accountability in those that are there, which would be the pilots flying the plane. So just to kind of use that as an example, you have to have people within your company who are owning this. In the case where you have part-time.
That is a tough one.
It is tough.
The way that you've just presented that makes it very tough for me because even in my mind, I felt myself saying like, when the pilot is actually flying the plane, we have to give him full accountability on everything.
Right.
The point where he actually starts flying the plane, it doesn't matter if he's permanent or part-time or fractional or consultant or whatever, we have to now give that person full accountability and trust, and everything comes along with it.
Correct.
And where I was kind of needling was like, I don't give this person full time. Like the person has not earned the full trust of the organization, which is my other point here that I wrote down independently. The challenges in building strong, integrated relationships, integrated leadership, trust from a person who's not there full time when the rest of the leadership is a crew of founders is there full time. Even if I'm theoretically talking about it, being in an organization where I was joining the executive team as a product manager, although I didn't have the title chief product officer, I was the only product person in the organization.
Right.
So I joined all the leadership meetings as the product rep. And a lot of that stuff was like me grabbing what they would say in the future of the organization type of stuff and grabbing it and running and doing the best I can with it. Rather than like, because I was a consultant in that organization, rather than setting a strategic direction of like, oh, I think we should push into this market or whatever. Rather than that, it was more of like interpreting what they were saying and trying to set up strategies to set them up to success.
I think people that are in that role, these fractional roles, especially, I'm talking about people that have been around the block, right? People that know what they're doing. They've built up over time the expertise to be good at building bridges, navigating the political waters, right? Making sure that they can operate that way. So if you get novices, what I call self-titled, people that want to be in the fractional role, I would say steer clear of that because they don't have a track record of having done this anywhere. I'm guessing, right? Because they don't have a track record. So how do you fully entrust somebody who doesn't have that as opposed to somebody who's done it before in multiple organizations, perhaps in multiple domains? That person's going to have a higher likelihood of success because they have the core skill set to build bridges and to walk the political tightropes.
We've been going for a while, so I want to hit the lightning round. As they say on other podcasts, it's time for the lightning round, Om. So it's like Pee-wee's Playhouse. If every time you say something that gets me really, really triggered, we go into the lightning round. And you said, hey, some of these people, like, they never worked in this role before. They're kind of over their head. They're pitching themselves as management consultants. I can do product. Product's just basically sales, right? It's basically coming up with strategies. So the specifically where I see it in my career field is I see a lot of people branding themselves. People coming out of professional consulting, people coming out of certain training backgrounds, agile backgrounds, stuff like that, and calling themselves expert in product management, CPO, right?
Yeah.
Never punched a day in their life, punched a time card for product manager a day in their life. So they're coming in to these roles, or people coming in and be like, I'm a product manager. Technology is basically the same as product, right? I can be a chief product and technology officer. I'm not going to call people out to say they're right or wrong. I'm just saying, look at our recent podcasts and make your own decisions. And do your own stunts. There's a lot of people out there providing generic, non-contextual, non-industry specific advice, calling themselves chief whatever officer, dispensing Zen wisdom in the form of fortune cookie It's just very general advice.
Everyone has an 8 ball. So I would say yes, first of all, it's way too prevalent, unfortunately. But just look at what they've done in terms of like where have they worked before and see if they have any customers that you can talk to that were impacted by their decisions, right? Ultimately, that's one way to find out.
Yeah.
Like, how good were they? Because if you cannot verify that, you are basically throwing a dart from 30,000 feet, and hopefully you'll land in the same zip code.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. This is so prevalent, though. Everybody's calling themselves
there is a lot
certified CXO.
That was my trepidation with this whole topic. Is like, how can you tell the difference between the snake oil salesman and like the real people that understand how to craft, strategies and roadmaps from those strategies and that kind of stuff. I have a list of positives and negatives here that I wanted to jump through just in this category of like, how do you know if this person is legit or not, or if they're just like a random, it's like MBB consultant or a random consultant who's just like relabeled themselves. They have this like Carnegie Mellon degree or whatever, and they're like, oh yeah, I can do whatever. I can juggle and be an acrobat and do CEO and CPO and whatever because I have this degree. Like I don't know, man. Like, is that really the way it works? Like, so the arguments that will be used here is, listen, I have transferable leadership skills. Okay, the leadership skills from serving on previous C-level boards or directorships or whatever is transferable in any job. Like any job needs. Even you said it earlier in the podcast. Is like there's a certain political finesse in this high-level organizational role that you need, and like I have these skills. The being able to work across departments, these cross-functional skills, cross-department skills. That is a talent. This cross-coordination skills is a talent. The strategic thinking, system thinking is a skill. I agree. All those. Completely agree. But at some point when you're making the claim, like my executive function skills, my executive level experience can compensate for any lack of traditional training, product management training, CTO training. When you say that, it is a stretch for me. Like when it comes to traditional product management, especially like, the Marty Kagan 4 categories, for example. Well, how do you actually go about knocking down each of the 4 ilities in the Marty Kagan categories? Okay, well, when you're saying, well, I have executive experience, so I can do anything. I mean, that comes across to me as a certain there's a certain classist connotation to me, saying that like, shut up, Brian. That's the product management. Is like it's not that complicated. I can do it. I got this Carnegie Mellon degree. That's how it sounds to me.
Right. You're wearing the cape, right? So if you're in this situation where you're looking at somebody who is like that, again, you got to figure out. So have they done this before and in different industries? I mean, don't just take that as face value because a lot of people will sell themselves, right, and upsell themselves. It's hard to find somebody that's really, really good who wants to just simply scale back, and maybe they just want to scale back their hours or something, right? Sure. But they have the gravitas to pull this off because they've done it. You can clearly see that. Yeah. They're already a known name, maybe in your industry, but maybe not elsewhere. But if they've done that, then there is a little bit more credibility there, right?
Yeah. Well, if you have one of these folks in your organization and you're like, Brian, I have a fractional CPO, I have a fractional CTO, I have a fractional product manager. I'm not sure if they're just solid on paper or if they have chops. Obviously we said like, well, you should talk to some of the people that they've worked with before. That you should do, and more than one. You should talk to at least 3, right? People that worked with before.
Yeah.
And don't just read on LinkedIn. Actually talk to people because you want to get at the heart of like what these folks did. Look at their background as well. Like I like to look at people's backgrounds. I like to know that people like they came straight out of college into like a chief product role. Like that is a red flag for me. I'm like, ooh, oh yeah, mommy and daddy get you jobs. Yeah, absolutely, that happens. There's some red flags here because as a product manager, if you don't have an understanding of product management, you come into one of these or I guess CTO as well. You come into one of these roles and you're the head of the organization and you don't understand about the product lifecycle. I mean, you don't understand the nuances of the MVP phase versus the growth phase versus the maturity phase. You don't understand what teams normally do in those phases. You can cause a lot of damage. Like not only driving people out of the organization, but, really messing up your ability to just purely deliver.
It could actually cost you customers too.
especially if you're one of these folks that like goes through, you came from the Kellogg school, you learned about like you do all your requirements and then you do all your software testing. You just learned poorly. The misalignment with the way modern product management, product development, the way teams work together, not having your team in silos, the whole thing we talked about on the 192 podcast about product management is dead, of like, people in Silicon Valley, they think of the Venn diagram as like these things. No. The Venn diagram is like, it's one circle. They're all just overlapping.
Right.
They should all be on the same team. If you're not aligned with the way that modern, I mean like since the Agile Manifesto modern.
20 plus years.
Yeah, 20 plus years.
Yeah.
I mean, get with it, right? Overemphasis on the wrong metrics. Huge. You know what I mean? People are like, we just need more velocity out of this team. That's the problem.
Right.
A real rookie type of stuff with folks in this. But there's some real damaging stuff in here, meaning you don't quite understand what technical debt really is and how to manage it. If you mess that up when the company's in growth phase, when the product gets to the maturity phase, you will never recover. You'll be like the Tiger King. You will never financially recover from that.
Because it balloons up.
Never.
Up.
Yes. You'll never recover from it.
You'll never get out from under it.
And then my favorite is the potential for, especially when you have salespeople in the chief product role, the potential to basically create product strategies and push initiatives that are completely disconnected from technical feasibility. You're pushing your team to do things and you're like, well, the technology doesn't really hit, so we're going to make a workaround and do this, and this is a one-off thing, and this other thing will be a one-off thing, and suddenly we have a bunch of custom products or custom implementations of our product.
Yeah.
And once again, you're back in the land of technical debt and you will never recover from it. And you bring in the new people and the new people are talking crazy, like rewrites from the ground up and stuff.
In some cases, you could try and kind of nip that in the bud by leveraging your architects and people like that to make sure that at least the runway is heading in one direction. But this is kind of before that even.
I mean, maybe, but you can't put guardrails on C-level executives.
You can't. And that's a difficult thing, right? You cannot. Absolutely. Sometimes you get the arrogance of people that have done it before, and they say, hey, I'm the prima donna, right? I'm going to come in here and revamp everything. You do have that too. But yeah, there's again examples of each of these, successful and not so successful examples, I'm sure.
I feel we've beat this up enough. I just wanted to bring up and put a pin and a little flag on the side of like, what if you get these people that make their money off of, they understand organizational politics and they're real easy to talk to and establishing relationships and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the Marty Kagan Transformed podcast that we did with Ed.
Right.
So in the Transform podcast that we did with Ed, when we talked about the book Transformed, one of the things Marty Kagan says in the book is, as a product leader, like he coins that term in Silicon Valley, and everyone was real quick to snap that term up. We love the term product leader, but one of the things that he said with like part of the book that they skipped while adding that to their role on LinkedIn was, as a product leader, you have to be able to coach your product managers in product management. So when they ask you, how do I do discovery practices? How do I figure out a lean business canvas? How do I figure out what customers to survey and what to write on the survey and how to write surveys that actually are meaningful? They're going to ask you those questions. And what are you going to say? Like, you never worked as a product manager.
You're going to make stuff up. That's really what's going to happen because you were brought in as an expert.
Right.
So you're not going to say, I don't know. You're never going to say that. You're going to make something up. And unfortunately, your product managers will go with that because they're following you. They're following your lead.
Yeah, they don't know either. I mean, they're new.
So you're going to be the first sheep to leap off the cliff. Well, or not. You'll just go that way.
Well, that sounds
March
exciting.
Forward.
That sounds exciting. We talked about the things to watch out for with these fractional folks. Do they have the skill to do what you're doing? Do they have the ability? Do they have the time? The nice thing about them being fractional, aka part-time, aka temp, is if it's just not working out, it's not working out.
Part company.
Let's just park it. Like, listen, you seem to have too many contracts going on. That's probably another advantage that we didn't point out, which it's a little cynical of an advantage, but it is an advantage to say, like, they are not a part-time employee. You agree to part ways when it doesn't seem to work out.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a role here for smart contracts to play at some point in the future, right? You have to get over the trust element of it first.
Right. We probably could have expanded more on this podcast to talk about, like, well, how do you get these jobs in the first place? You know people, or maybe you're just a big firm, or maybe, there are ways to get in, or maybe you just like are good at saying like, hey, pitching yourself or whatever. But that's not really the point of the podcast. Is like how to position and pitch yourself as this.
Right.
But hey, if you're willing to cold call people and pitch yourself and throw out flyers and emails, networking. It's networking to us.
It is. Just do more networking.
Do more networking. To get your name out there and be like, hey, I know how to do this. I can dedicate a day a week, 2 days a week, whatever, to your company. And Monday, Tuesday will be your consulting days, and I'll come into your corporate office. Yeah, that makes total sense. There's a business for it, but if you're trying to do it fractionally and work from any part of the country or whatever, it's getting to be a hard sale.
You're probably not going to... A real company isn't likely to hire you off of Fiverr or something like that.
Yeah.
Because anybody could say anything there. But if you have the chops, you've been around, and you can stand behind those, then you might get a chance to do this. Definitely lead with your experience first and offer the chance to talk to your customers.
Like, obviously, you're not connecting strategy to the individual roadmap items in order to establish and push forward those roadmaps and then validate after the roadmaps are delivered, and then bring those learnings from the validation all the way back to the strategy level. Very few permanent product people are doing that because honestly, there's just not enough time because even those people are spread thin. If you're fractional, if you're part-timer, contract, consultant, and you have a limited amount of time, you really need to be concentrating your time on the most valuable things to the org. And I think, again, just my opinion, I think the most valuable things to the org are the things that most orgs get wrong right off the bat, which is the strategies they're engaging in are wrong. Yeah. And the validation that comes at the end of the roadmap, implementing through the development teams, never gets back to change the strategies. I would try to fix that first. That would be my recommendation to anyone out there that's trying to like differentiate yourself as a consultant. Oh, sorry, fractional person. That would be my suggestion.
I think the phrase gig worker came up recently.
Gig
right?
worker, yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah.
So I agree with that recommendation. I mean, try and shorten that cycle as much as possible. That way you can go in and lead with data.
I think it's applicable whether you're fractional or not. You could par it down into how can I make the most impact as quickly as possible? I'm a permanent product manager. Well, you can still use everything we talked about.
Sure, that's true. So this podcast hopefully was of some value to you, brought to you by two fractional podcast people. And let us know down in the comments below any feedback that you have, including topics for future discussions. And don't forget to like and subscribe.